Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Veterinary Association for Farm Animal Welfare 2025 Symposium, Achieving Higher Welfare Living Environments for Farm Animals, Bridging the Gap Between Research and Practice. My name is Abby Zoltick, and I am the Director of Education for VAFAW. For those of you unfamiliar with VAFA, our mission is to advocate for animals used in food and fiber production by providing a veterinary perspective grounded in animal welfare science and ethics. We achieve this through education, policy development, advocacy, and collaborative animal care. VAFA currently has 3 areas of focus: preventing and mitigating pain experienced by farm animals, promoting living environments that meet the animal's physical and psychological needs, and lastly, ensuring humane end-of-life practices. If you are not yet a member of VAFA but would like to become one, please send us your name through the Q&A box located at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or visit www.vafa.org. Membership is open to anyone who supports our mission, and the first year of membership is free. If you are not sure whether your VAFA membership is current or requires renewal, please type your name into the chat or send us an email at info@vafa.org, and we will get back to you with an update on your membership status. We are very excited to launch our first symposium focused on farm animal living environments. VAFA works to advance housing systems that protect animals from disease and injury and provide them with opportunities for agency, the expression of natural behaviors, and positive engagement with their environment and conspecifics. So this is a quick look at today's schedule. We'll begin with an introduction to farm animal living environments, and then you will hear from our expert speakers, Dr. Jennifer Van Aas, Dr. Leonie Jacobs, Mr. Ruud Zanders, and Dr. Vera Bavink. We will then have a break from 1:20 to 2 p.m. Central Time, followed by our last 3 speakers, Dr. Thomas Eady, Mr. Kevin Kurbis, and Dr. Marina von Kaiserlink. Each presentation is pre-recorded, but it will be followed by a live Q&A session with the speaker present. And throughout the symposium, you're welcome to submit your questions through the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we will address as many of these questions as time permits. So as I mentioned, I'm Abby Zoltick. I'm Director of Education for VAFA. I'm also a postdoctoral animal welfare researcher at the University of Pennsylvania School of Veterinary Medicine. And we're going to begin with an introduction to farm animal living environments. And I'm going to focus on exploring living environments within the context of an animal's behavioral ecology, which refers to the evolutionary basis for an animal's behavior. And as an organization, we chose to use the term living environments rather than housing. And this is because housing speaks more to the kind of structure that you occupy, whereas living environment encompasses much more. So what an animal can engage with environmentally, who they can engage with socially, and opportunities that they have for behavioral expression. So to me, this here is a very lovely pastoral image. I took this photo while sitting with cows in a pasture in Scotland. But providing domestic animals with appropriate living environments isn't as simple as creating this beautiful pastoral image. So we need to ask, for example, is there reliable fencing? Are there predators? What about fly control and parasites? Do they have enough shade? How far do these cows have to walk to find water? Is the soil quality sufficient to support high quality forage growth? Do they have opportunities for choice? And are we managing the land sustainably? So I'm not here to present one single housing system as superior or to simply say that all animals should be housed outside, but rather that we need to be thoughtful when we design and manage living environments for the animals under our care, and to emphasize the importance of trying to see the world through their eyes when creating the environments in which they will spend their lives. So domesticated farm animals live in environments that are dramatically different from those of their wild ancestors. So in the first image here, we have a jungle fowl. So this is the ancestor of domesticated fowl, so chickens and turkeys. And we see the jungle fowl in a complex environment with different opportunities for sensory engagement. And this contrasts with this image of barren confined cages with layer hens. Now, the wild progenitor of the cow, the auroch, is now extinct. So this here is an image of a bison, and cows and bison share a common ancestor. And we see here a calf with her mother, free to engage with the environment and conspecifics, versus our dairy calf, socially isolated in an individual hutch. And then lastly, we have the wild boar sow and her boarlets. And we see the sow on this soft organic surface with the freedom to move around and regulate interactions with her piglets. And then in contrast, below, we see our commercial sow in a crate on a hard surface with a larger litter. She's unable to engage in dynamic movement or regulate her interactions with her piglets. Now, these human-created environments profoundly impact behavioral expression. So they impact how animals can interact with the environment and also how they can interact with one another. But we really need to dig a little deeper to understand how these environments impact the welfare of domesticated animals. So using the wild boar as an example, in the wild, behaviors have survival value. So the wild boar has a rich behavioral repertoire, and we're just going to look at some select behaviors. But to begin, they live in these matrilineal social groups where they sleep in communal nests, they participate in communal foraging, and they also collectively protect all offspring in the group. So they'll even babysit for one another's offspring as needed. And this has survival value in the wild because communal living is going to increase foraging efficiency, strengthen defense against predators, and also enhance offspring protection. Now, the wild boar also engages in foraging behavior, devoting the majority of active hours to this behavior. And foraging has survival value in that it enables animals, obviously, to locate food, but it also provides them with this awareness of their surroundings, which is going to help them to locate valuable resources, avoid predators, and even acquire a mate. They also wallow in mud and water to help with thermoregulation, and they build nests. And this is particularly important for the sow in preparation for farrowing. So nests keep piglets warm, they protect them from weather extremes, and they help with camouflage to protect them from predators. And it also provides the sow with comfort during this extended period of time that she's spending in lateral recumbency. So we know that wild animals have this rich repertoire of behaviors that they perform, but we also need to remember that genetically, domesticated animals do differ from their wild progenitors. So just looking at our modern domesticated Holstein cow, laying hen, and pig, they were all domesticated around 10,000 years ago. And we see that phenotypically, they look very different from their ancestors. And in addition to undergoing domestication thousands of years ago, many farm animal species have also undergone hundreds of years of intense selective breeding for very specific qualities, and these are generally related to production. So they look different, and they also express very different traits in terms of production. So we have both genotypic and phenotypic divergence. So now we have these animals that we've domesticated that have undergone hundreds of years of artificial selection, and we put them in these environments that are dramatically different from the wild. So, for example, we house them in climate-controlled, sheltered environments where they're not at risk of predation, and we provide them with food that we aim to tailor to their energy requirements and that also support high production. So, as a result, many of these ancestral behaviors are no longer functionally relevant. They don't seem like they would have any survival value in these commercial environments. So based on what we know about domestication, about selective breeding, and modern commercial housing, we need to ask two very important questions to understand the welfare impact of farm animal living environments. So, first of all, given that farm animals were domesticated thousands of years ago and underwent hundreds of years of genetic selection, are they still motivated to perform ancestral behaviors? And then, secondly, given that farm animals live in environments that are dramatically different from their ancestors, are these ancestral behaviors that were once so critical to survival still relevant to domestic pig welfare? So I'll start with the first question. Will domestic pigs perform these ancestral behaviors when given the opportunity? And so one way to answer this question is to see how domestic pigs respond when they're released into more wild or natural environments. And in the seminal Edinburgh Pig Park study, this was conducted in 1989, two researchers, Alexander Stolba and David Woodgush, did exactly that. They took intensively reared pigs and they released them into a semi-natural environment. And what they observed was that the pigs quickly reverted to the behavior of the wild boar. So they formed small subgroups, they traveled together, built communal nests, they spent most of their day foraging, and they wallowed in mud when the temperature increased. So we can see that though they may look very different, their behaviors have not diverged. And studies that followed have confirmed these findings. So we're really lucky that the wild boar still exists in that we can compare wild and domestic pig behavior in real time. And what we know from extensive scientific research is that despite being domesticated thousands of years ago, despite hundreds of years of selective breeding, the ancestral nature of the pig persists. And knowing this, it's important that when we assess living environments, we consider natural living and behavioral expression. So this is the three orientations model, which our other speakers will discuss in more detail. But I want to mention that each element here is critical, and they're often interwoven. And in this presentation, I'm focusing on natural living and how this impacts affective state and physical health. However, these circles don't exist in isolation, and I really want to emphasize that one is not more important than the other. So, evaluating living environments through this lens, it's important that we ask, what behavior does the environment prevent the animal from expressing? And how can we modify or change the environments that we create to help facilitate these highly motivated behaviors? So knowing what we now know about the domestic pig, I want to briefly consider modern commercial pig housing, using the behavior of the wild boar as this kind of comparative framework. So confinement housing is the predominant form of housing for sows and gilts during gestation in the US. And we see that in this form of housing, the animals are unable to move freely, they can't regulate social interactions, and they can't engage with a sensory-rich environment. And this is really just touching the surface. There are many behaviors that they're unable to perform. Just as some examples, they can't actively pursue goals, they don't encounter cognitive challenges, make choices, they can't even seek comfort. And globally, the predominant form of housing for sows during parturition and throughout lactation or nursing is also intensive confinement. And we see again that she cannot move freely. And I also want to highlight some behaviors that are very important to the sow before parturition and during nursing. So we see in the image on the right that she doesn't have the ability to build a nest. She doesn't have the space, she doesn't have the material. And nest building is a critical hormonally driven behavior that domestic sows are still motivated to perform. So even when you provide a sow with a pre-constructed nest, she will still work to build one herself. So it's not just the nest itself that she wants, but also the actual expression of this behavior. She also doesn't have the freedom to regulate nursing. And in the wild, a sow will regulate nursing in a way that also considers her own health, comfort, and future reproductive fitness. And without this agency, piglets will demand and receive more than what would balance the interests of both the piglets and the sow. Lastly, I want to look at grower pig housing, which has received less attention than sow housing despite very significant welfare concerns. So, grower pigs are pigs that are raised for meat and will eventually go to market. And they are predominantly housed in barren, crowded environments, as you see illustrated on the right. So, they're prevented from free movement, the ability to forage and explore within a complex environment, and the ability to engage in healthy social interactions in which they can choose to interact or choose to avoid contact or escape conflict. So again, this is an environment that prevents agency and limits cognitive challenges and also prevents rewarding behavioral opportunities. Now, I'm using pigs as an example, but I want to emphasize that we see the persistence of ancestral behaviors in our other farm animal species as well. And so their living environments require the same scrutiny. So when provided the opportunity, we see that cows, just as some examples, want to graze, explore, engage socially, allogroom, and when we look at our chickens, we also see they want to forage, dust bathe, perch, and also engage socially. And animals want to choose when to perform these behaviors, and their preferences may vary. For example, throughout the day, based on changes in weather. And we also have to remember that animals of the same species aren't monoliths. So preferences vary among animals of the same species. And this is why environmental choice is so critical. So moving on to our second question, are these behaviors still relevant to welfare if they are no longer needed for the purpose of survival? So in other words, if we deny animals the opportunity to express these behaviors, does their welfare suffer? And we know from scientific studies that environments that are barren, crowded, or confined prevent the expression of highly motivated behaviors, leading to behaviors that are indicative of frustration, boredom, anxiety, stress, and depression. And these are terms that were once reserved for humans. So how do we know that animals are experiencing these states? They tell us through their behavior. And when we evaluate their behavior in these environments, we observe psychological health repercussions. So, for example, we see altered time budgets. When there's no opportunity to, for example, forage, exercise, or socialize, activities that would typically dominate active hours, we see animals instead spending more time inactive or engaged in abnormal behaviors. So some of these abnormal behaviors include stereotypies, and stereotypies are these seemingly functionless, repetitive behaviors that we don't observe in the wild, and they may be a coping mechanism for animals in environments that aren't meeting their needs. So some examples of stereotypies include bar biting in pigs and tongue rolling in cows. And we may also see injurious behavior that may be self-inflicted or directed at conspecifics. And some examples include feather pecking in chickens and ear or tail biting in pigs. And we may also see excessive aggression. And these behaviors are often multifactorial in origin, but inappropriate environments can play a significant role in the development of these behaviors. And these abnormal behaviors often prompt management practices that may negatively impact welfare. So for example, to mitigate tail biting in pigs, we dock tails. To prevent horn injuries, we disbud calves and kid goats. To prevent feather pecking, we beak trim chickens. And these are examples of using painful management procedures that involve modifying the animal to the environment rather than the other way around. We also see negative physical health repercussions related to living environments. And many diseases are, of course, multifactorial with, for example, genetic and nutritional contributing factors. But the animal's physical environment can certainly play a role in the development of common disease conditions, including things like lameness, mastitis, respiratory disease. And disease conditions can be related to, for example, the flooring of a facility, the cleanliness, ventilation. It can be related to stocking density, even restricted movement. We see, for example, decubitus ulcers or pressure sores in crated sows due to movement restriction on hard flooring without bedding. And again, I don't want to oversimplify this. Disease conditions are often multifactorial in origin, but inappropriate or inadequate housing conditions often contribute to these conditions. So based on what we know about the nature of farm animals are still motivated to perform ancestral behaviors even when commercial settings remove their functional relevance. And as we've just seen, their welfare suffers when we deny them the opportunity to perform these behaviors. So consequently, we need nature to guide how we nurture. So we need to use the behavioral ecology of our farm animals to guide how we create and manage their living environments. And this doesn't have to be one size fits all. So these images on the right are from a website created by Scotland's Rural College and Newcastle University, freefarrowing.org, where they discuss different farrowing system options and provide resources for farmers. So we have scientific data to support that the nature of an animal should guide how we house them. So why then do predominant housing systems often fail to support these highly motivated behaviors? And to answer this question, we need to think about how we got here. So farm animals used to be raised in extensive systems. So livestock grazed outdoors, chickens and pigs were reared outdoors, and we had lower inputs, but also lower yields per unit of land, so less agricultural productivity. And so, with a growing population, we experienced a rising demand for meat, which led to a dramatic increase in average herd size. And this began to really challenge the management efficiency of outdoor housing. And we've seen a shift in agricultural practices throughout history, with the shift to intensification accelerated during certain periods, like, for example, the Industrial Revolution. And new technologies also emerged to support efficiency through mechanization. And in the context of farm animal living environments, this agricultural intensification manifested as a shift to indoor housing, with more animals now raised on less land. And intensive housing is now the predominant form of farm animal housing in the US today. And our modern commercial housing decisions reflect the priorities of many different stakeholders with complex obligations to other stakeholders. So in general, decisions are going to be driven by many factors, and this can include ethical decision making, but it's also including economics, labor and management efficiency, social and cultural norms, political factors, environmental issues. And what we see with farm animals, the very important but voiceless stakeholder, is that we often end up with a situation where economic and labor efficiency take precedence over animal welfare. So we need to ask, can an animal's behavioral ecology shape how we design living environments in a way that prioritizes animal welfare while also addressing diverse stakeholder concerns? And this is difficult to achieve without communication. So this includes communication between policymakers and scientists, scientists and veterinarians, producers and consumers. And we want, for example, policy to be grounded in evidence-based science. And we need this science and policy to also consider the practical needs of farmers and the challenges that they face. So communication between stakeholders is critical. And this is to understand one another's perspectives and also to work together to find solutions. So today we're working on bridging the gap between research, so what science tells us benefits animals, and on-farm practice, how we can actually implement these higher welfare practices on farms with the understanding of the importance of economic and labor efficiency. So today we're highlighting producers and industry representatives who are leading the way in improving animal welfare on farms, and researchers and welfare scientists, some of whom work closely with the industry. And all of our speakers share a common goal: to improve animal welfare, though they may approach animal welfare from different angles. And it's important to not only highlight these critical voices, but also to bring their perspectives and insights to a common table. So today's speakers are Dr. Marina van Keyserlink, Dr. Jennifer van As, Mr. Ruud Zanders, Dr. Vera Bavink, Mr. Kevin Kurbis, Dr. Leonie Jacobs, and Dr. Thomas Eady. And we thank all of our speakers so much for joining us today. Some of the questions that we'll explore today are: how can we successfully rear calves socially? How can we practically design group housing for sows? How can we economically raise chickens free from cages? Let me see how we are with time. Okay.